Hi, everyone. Welcome to Yoga with Jenny. I'm coming to you live from my little home studio here in the basement of my house, and I've got Mary with me, of course. So we'll see if she gives me back my space. Today, we're going to be doing my take on hip opening. I find often traditional yoga classes where we open the hips, there seems to be a lot of postures where the legs are pushed wider, and there's that emphasis on stretch and flexibility. And this approach, this class kind of flips that on its head. So instead of opening the legs more, we're actually going to be closing them, adducting, working on internal rotation. For many of us, if we find we have stiffer, tighter hips, say from sitting or from standing or, oh goodness, from life, I think that strengthening the outer hips and overemphasizing that turn out of the hips can really be not so beneficial. And so we find that we feel worse after doing more of that. So my hope is that you'll gain some, yes, flexibility, but kind of a new idea about how to work with your hips in a more balanced way through this class. All right, let's go ahead and get started. We're going to start with a block. Come to your back. And I've got the block set on its skinniest setting. Right? I always talk about blocks. Somebody once told me the mama bear, baby bear, and papa bear. So this is the skinniest setting. You can, of course, turn it to be a little wider or a little wider still. The wider your legs are, the easier it is to connect to that feeling of muscular engagement through the inner hip. So, and your thigh and inner hip, I should say. So whatever setting works for you, plant your feet. You can always lift your head just gently onto a blanket or a pillow if that feels relaxing for you. And start by breathing deeply. Connecting to that sense of your breath being a full-bodied experience. So we're not just simply breathing into our belly. We're not just simply breathing into our chest, but we're breathing all over, distributing the breath in a way that helps us feel a little bit more relaxed. Brings us more into the present moment. And it helps our muscles and our body because we're getting that full exchange of breath. New, fresh oxygen coming in. Old, used breath going out. And then we're going to start by squeezing the block. So what we're doing is basically bringing our legs away from that tendency to flare open. Sometimes when I look down at my knees when I'm sitting, I find my knees are really far apart or my knees or toes point out to the sides of the room. And so we're going to try to bring our legs back into a better position inside of our hip by pressing in on that block with an exhalation. And then gently relaxing with the inhalation. And if you've been with me before, you have heard this before. The adductors are an amazing synergistic muscle to the core. Oh, sorry, guys. I need to take that toy away from the dog. This is what it's like to do yoga with a dog. So as I squeeze the block, if I've got a block or a ball or a blanket, I'm going to think about Mula Bandha, the lift of my perineum, my muscles that are deep inside my core, lifting in and up. And then relax as I inhale. So that's the start. If you're looking to feel this a little bit more, lift your feet up into the air, lift your knees up into the air. And then there's less rest. So every exhalation, I'm squeezing, drawing in and up through Mula Bandha and beyond. And every inhalation, I'm concentrating on my breath, but not so much on letting go. It's more of a continuous squeeze. I like to open my arms wide, trying to take my chest and shoulders and neck out of it. If you want to make this harder, straighten your knees. And can you bring special awareness, focus to the two sides of your body here? This is a symmetrical action, but is it symmetrical for you? Can you feel both sides working? Take a brief rest, maybe hug those knees into your chest. Let's continue strengthening. So the first movement we'll do is just lowering the legs while we're pressing in, but lowering the weight of the legs away from the torso. So essentially we're moving just at this hip joint here, not at the knee joint. So when you hear the exercise known as, it's called the toe tap, it's really not about tapping your feet, it's about lowering your legs away from your body, away from the stable core. So it's an exhale, press, and try to lower. Inhale to lift. If you have that moment where your shoulders jut, your chin juts, don't go that far. Try to stop before you're tempted to use other muscles. Remember the squeeze. I say that because I couldn't feel my block anymore. I was not pressing on it. Memory. A big part of mindfulness training. Take a brief rest. So hopefully you're feeling both sides working together. This time, instead of lowering with that shortened lever arm, we're going to stretch the legs and then bend them. So making a longer lever, taking it further away from the core makes it harder. The lower the legs go as they're stretching makes it harder too. I'm still pressing, squeezing, lifting, zipping. One more. And then come back, take the object out from between your legs, hold your kneecaps, and just simply take them into a stirring motion. So I mentioned wanting to be able to turn the legs open a little bit, wanting to be able to turn inward a little bit. So explore for a second now with one leg, holding either the knee or the leg or the shin. Turn it open a little bit. Turn it from the hip. So make sure you're not just pulling on your foot, but turn the thigh. And then turn it inward a little bit. Notice how my foot and shin kick out a little bit as I turn inward. So that's exploration of how much external rotation and internal rotation you have. Most of us have a lot less internal than external, so just so you know. And then take this one leg into a stir, just isolating one side at a time here, just in order to feel those differences. Most of us do have differences side to side. So here I'm just going to do that exploration, external or outward rotation a little bit, internal, outward, internal. Sometimes you get popping and clicking. discomfort, there's all a part of it, right? Maybe there's a difference between your two hips that you know about. And then take that leg on a journey, a circular journey. So it kind of incorporates a little bit of that rotation, but it also incorporates pulling in towards you and adduction and abduction. Good, and then hug both knees up towards you. Now we're going to open the legs, both legs going open into happy baby pose. Sometimes after that vigorous squeezing, it's really too much just to fan those legs open. I like to support as well, support under your legs, support, hold the weight of the legs. It's like supporting with blocks so the muscles can learn to relax and lengthen, open. No need to go any further. If you want to reach for your feet, you can do that without your low back tucking or tilting, then go ahead. Breathe. Sense, if you can, the breath moving towards that junction of your body and your legs, so right towards the hip. So in other words, a deep diaphragmatic belly breath moves the breath into your hips. Good, then come back together and rock and roll. Now I always pad my knees. I have slightly older knees, so they like a little bit of tender cush underneath them. So go ahead, feel free to grab something. And we're going to work with the block for our cat and cow. So the first place to go is just your normal movement. Practice moving your spine, undulating through flexion, which is rounding, and extension. Feel the movement through your back, your hips, and your shoulders and head. So it's all over movement. And then start to notice what happens with the block naturally as you scoop your belly up into your body. You feel how that block, your legs kind of draw together naturally. Squeeze in, really exaggerate it. Lift your belly up into your body. And as you inhale, it's not so much about releasing the block as it is about sending your tailbone back. Almost think of sending the block back behind you, widening your sit bones. Hip opening is also about internal rotation, right? Pulling those inner thighs together. But here, we're tucking the tailbone under. And then here, we're sending the tailbone back behind us, widening, relaxing the glutes. One more time. So this movement incorporates other muscles, not just those, simply those inner thighs. As you come to a more happy medium, a position where your back is supported and long, so the belly doesn't drop, the ribs don't drop. You're also not rounding or doming. I'm going to just adjust my block a little bit so I can get some sensation there. And now we're going to try to lighten our body up. So this is preparation for any plank. As you try to lighten your body up, I always assert that having more muscles on board can only help our planks, right? So plank pose is hard enough. Let's not make it harder by having relaxed and kind of sinking shoulders. So we need shoulders on board. We need not a relaxed and sinking core. We need the core on board. And we also need our legs. So here I'm going to squeeze the inner thighs into that block, tuck my toes under, and lift from my inner thighs to Mula Bandha to my body, which lightens my core. Just breathing. Set those knees gently back down. So this bear crawl position or plank prep position. Notice that my butt isn't higher than my head. I'm trying not to go up downward dog I'm trying not to dome my ribs and start to round and shrug my shoulders. So my shoulders and neck are soft and relaxed. Well, my neck is soft, but my shoulders are strong. So can you have a conversation? Can you move your head around? Slowly setting it back down. Take the block away and lean back into child's pose. Then come back up. This time, instead of having the block there, you're going to simply bring your knees right together. So they are adducted completely together to the midline. And then we're going to look for that range of motion practice on one side at a time. So this is, again, this is about flexibility and movement in the hips. So I'm going to take one knee and I'm going to steer it or stir it around like that knee stir on my back. But you'll notice what's not happening is my butt isn't doing, my back isn't doing that cat and cow. So I'm relatively steady. And then I'm watching if my leg can make those motions right from the hip joint itself. Inward and outward. A little in, a little out. And then lean it back and rest. Come back up, squeeze the knees together. So find that position where everything's right in the center and then move away from it and come back towards it. Other side. And then rest. One more movement we'll practice before putting the pieces together is lying on one side. And I do like to have a little padding under my head so that I don't feel like my neck is kind of cricked over. As you just did on your hands and knees, we're going to practice, yes, separating the legs. But this is sort of the sequence that I was referring to when we, in yoga classes and fitness classes, we tend to strengthen a lot through the outer hip because we need it, but we tend to not strengthen the inner hip a lot. So this is a lifting and lowering of the leg. So I'm taking it away from the middle of my body and lifting it out to the side, but trying to be conscious of not turning, not letting the knee go faster than the foot, but also it's not turned in, internal rotation. It's just lifting and lowering while maintaining my torso stability. So it's just like what you just did a moment ago on your hands and knees, lifted core, strong, steady body, and moving leg. We call this the dog at the fire hydrant. It's such a beautiful name. So I'm going to lift my leg up in the air, and instead of, again, overemphasizing those rotational components outward, I'm going to emphasize turning inward. So this is a reversal of the classic clam exercise. I'm going to turn my thigh and knee inward. And yes, my shin and my foot, you can see them kicking up. You can see them responding to the movement at my thigh and my knee. But what I don't want you to do is that's just from my knee down, right? I want you to also not move your body, turning your body. So keep a hand on your hip and just watch for that and make it all about your thigh. If you picture the way you screw in a light bulb, you're turning that thigh bone right up in the socket. Each time returning to a level or parallel positioning with that knee and shin. should be working by now. You should be feeling those muscles in through here. And also the bottom hip. Now just hold it for a second here and breathe. Slowly set that knee down. And then from right on top of the other knee, which is a little bit of turning in, bring it even more internally rotated. Bring the knee over, across, in front of the other knee. Either stay here and rest or twist your body open. That requires a little bit of rotation in your spine. If your spine doesn't like it, stay right where you were. But this increases the stretch, the length along those outside hip muscles. And slowly come back around over to the other side. Of course, I'm trying to be balanced here. Can't forget the other side. So I didn't talk about it at all on the other side, but as we move through this sequence, part of trying not to let your body move is that core musculature. So maybe start with squeezing the knees, lifting up that mula bandha, the feeling of ribs coming in and together, and then lift your leg. And often when we have tightness or stiffness in our hip, sometimes this the whole hip wants to lift and move. It's also stiffness and tightness in our back. So practice holding your hip down, maybe even using your hand. Gives it a nice amount of resistance. I also didn't address feet on the other side. I tend to practice this exercise flexed. You can kind of see whether you have like a little twisting going on in your lower leg. That's just my lower leg twisting and my ankle. But what I want you to do is try to keep everything united. So toes, knee, thigh, all moving at the same rate here. I think of yoga as being this union, right? Unite your body through your alignment, and then your body and your mind. So we come up to the top of that, and we start to turn internally and come back up. I have a little restricted range of motion. If you're really getting into that video feed, you can probably see the difference between my two sides. And maybe you feel it yourself. Notice the shin foot does kick up a little bit, but without the hip turning way forwards. It's just inside the hip joint. And then lift and hold it. Slowly bring it down with control and then jog it in front of the other knee. So this knee is now turned inward. It's crossing my body. Come all the way back around. Good. Come up onto your hands and knees. Once again, bringing in padding if you need it. And set yourself up with your blocks toward the front edge of your mat. We're going to lift up and find downward facing dog. As always, pedal through your dog pose, get comfy, walk the dog, as they say. And then even in our dog pose, we're going to pause, grab a block. If you need to set your knees down to do that, go ahead and do that. Soften your knees, so unlock the knees, bend the knees, in other words. And then I'm going to work to stretch my knees, but not straighten them. unless you can get there safely. But using the feeling, the engagement through my inner legs, my inner core, to support a nice lengthening through the spine. So it's not about getting straight knees at the expense of my spine. My spine stays long and it has little curves. So the block is about integrating. We're going to use the block in our plank pose too, so come forward. So do bring your hips down so you don't have a little pike in your tailbone. But bring your hips down not so low that they droop. Not so high that your back is round, but lifted in the core. And engage through the shoulders. I'm imagining drawing the block up towards my belly button. So I'm pulling the block toward me. Not just crushing it. Yeah, downward facing dog. And it's a little tricky with the block there, but can you waddle your feet to your hands? We're going to come up to standing, and I may need to adjust my view here. Oh, yes. There we are. So stand on your mat or off your mat. We're going to stand with our block. Surprise, surprise. So yes, we have a lot more going on here because now we're not only on our knees or just on our back, we have knees, ankles, feet. So yes, as we practice a balance pose here, lifting the heels, your ankle strength does, your calf strength does make a difference in whether you will be stable, able to lift and lower smoothly, or whether your ankles are wobbling around, your feet are kind of moving around. But what I want you to concentrate on feeling is this feeling of, again, uniting via this block squeeze. So I'm pulling in and lifting up with my abdominals, my core strength, and my adductors, my inner thighs. I'm trying not to sway my body in order to lift my body up. Instead, lifting in and up. Good, and then take your block away. Just shake it out a little bit. So sometimes we don't feel it so much, that need to engage when we're on 2 feet. You have a steady platform, let's just call it, when we have 2 feet on the ground. It's so much easier to stay stable when we have 2 feet on the ground. And so much of the time when we then take weight and shift it into 1 foot, that's when things become less steady, of course. We see crashing in of the knee, we see leaning into the hip or twisting in the torso. So what we're going to practice is going into 1 foot, going onto a one-legged stance, just super gentle. Just a little lift of 1 foot and then the other. So notice if your body wants to lean, especially if it's through the hips, or if it's through your torso, or your knees, or your ankles. Practice remembering the block, the sensation along your inner legs before you lift up. So it is possible, if you start with your feet right together, to squeeze and then move. To find it and then move. And I want you to find one side and hold. Depending on the strength in your hip flexors, it may be possible to reach for that knee, lift it up high enough to hold it. I'm holding with my opposite hand here. Look at how my knee is not turned. It's straight forward. And then I'm going to hold that steadiness through both sides and turn my torso across. Back to center, step that foot confidently to your mat. Hug into the midline to lift up the other leg. Try not to lift your whole hip up to lift that leg. Knee is in front of its own hip, and then I'm turning across that hip. So again, this is a little internal rotation bias when I turn my body around that leg, across that leg. Come back and set it down. We'll end on our mats. As always, if sitting is not your favorite, if it feels like you're really tight, your knees kind of come up towards you, or your back tends to feel hunched, sitting up a little bit higher can help all these seated postures. We're going to go into Ardha Matsyendrasana. It's a half-seated twist. So it is very much what you just did standing. If you start with your legs out in front, bend one knee and cross the foot over. If your hips are really stiff, you might stay with the leg, as we did standing, knee right in front of its own hip. If you're pregnant, for reasons of space, you probably don't want to cross the foot over. But if you want to cross it over, there's that opportunity for a little bit more exploration in terms of the hip internal rotation. And I'm going to turn my body across again, twisting towards that knee, into the knee, as I pull my leg into my chest. We've done this pose before. You can, of course, have that bottom knee bent as well, heel near the sit bone, as long as your body stays more or less symmetrical. Come back around and shake it out. Just switch sides. So again, put knee in front of hip if you like, put on the same side or cross it over. Lift and twist. Bottom leg can remain straight or bent. You'll see I'm kind of massaging my thigh to really turn it inward. So much of the time we tend to focus on those outward rotational movements. I'm kind of getting my leg, persuading the flesh and via the flesh, the bone, to actually turn inward into the midline of the body. And then come back around, unwind your legs, shake it out. And so the follow-up to this is we'll come onto our backs. Bring your blocks with you. And it's not a test, but it is. Just fan the knees open. So you're fanning them open into Supta Baddha Konasana. Baddha Konasana, our diamond-shaped stretch here. Bound angle pose. Notice if you feel a freedom of motion, you feel like your knees just want to fan open. That's a good result. If it doesn't feel like they're opening very easily, change the setting of your block to support where it feels much easier. Remember, all of us will have different settings, different positions. Our yoga asana is serving our own bodies, our own needs. Take rest here. allow your breath to be full and deep, stretching down into the belly, but also up into your chest. When you're ready to come out of this position, perhaps assisting by lifting your knees back up, rolling off to one side. And then our final test, again, it's not a test, but it is a test to see what it's like to sit single crossed legs. If you normally find it really restricted, you feel like your knees are kind of up around your shoulders, your back feels hunched over. Notice if it feels a little bit more easeful here to sit after working with the hips, turning inward a little. So hopefully this makes sense to you, and give me your feedback. Let me know how it felt. May we all be happy. May we be healthy. May we be more at peace. May we live with more ease in our body, mind, and heart. Namaste. Have a great day.